So let's continue with our discussion of the integumentary system, with finishing our discussion with sections 5.5 and 5.6, accessory structures, right? So not only do we have skin, but clearly we have our fingernails, our hair. I used to have more hair, but you know how that go. And glands. Remember, we talked about in chapter 4 when we discussed epithelial tissue that epithelial tissue gives rise to endocrine and exocrine glands. Endocrine delivers its hormone into the, or substance into the bloodstream, exocrine onto a surface, some type of surface, or into a hollow organ. Okay. So let's discuss those. All right. So hair. Hair is an accessory structure or appendage of the integumentary system. Hair, nails, glands, all right, are accessory structures derived from the epithelium, the dermis and epidermis, all right, derived from the epithelium. So they're from the skin. All right, hair is one example, a small filamentous structure. Hair may not have as many purposes as we give it. You know, we tend to spend a lot of time and money on hair. Oh, I know. I'm married to a Black woman who loves her hair, and so we spend a lot of time on these things. But you can find hair on the face, on the head, on the arms, all over the body, chest, back, legs. You can find hair. Right, small filamentous structure which protrudes from different body surfaces. Right, this is the general structure of hair. Notice we have the cuticle on the outside, the cortex, and then we have the medulla. You see here in this diagram the hair follicle. We have this epithelial root sheath, the dermal root sheath, the medulla, the cortex, cuticle. Right? You'll notice some similar structures when we discuss the nails. Human hair doesn't really play a significant role, so you don't need to know a whole bunch about hair for the purposes of our class, but it does provide some protection. It can help protect from some UV radiation and from some trauma. It also helps detect change. You know, if the wind is blowing, you can feel it moving the hair on your skin. What is the structure of hair? Stratified, squamous, keratinized epithelial cells. The shaft and the root are both made of those. Where is that? That sounds very familiar. Stratified, squamous, keratinized epithelial cells. It sounds like skin, if you remember correctly. Sounds like skin, right? So the shaft and the root are both made of cells that are keratinized. Squamous, that means they're flat, stratified, multiple layers. But also means that they are dead. Columns of dead cells. Your hair is dead, right? It's not alive. It does not require oxygen. We spend a lot of money on something that's dead. I know women don't want to hear that, but now the dermal root is alive. The epithelial root sheath is alive, but the part that you see, the shaft and the hair root, is no longer living. That's why I can grab and pull, I can pinch my hair and I don't feel a thing. But if I pull it, I can feel it at the root. Okay. Structure of hair, It's embedded in the dermis. Remember, the dermis is deep to the epidermis. It's embedded in the dermis, which is connective tissue, surrounded by small sensory neuron. As you see here, many epithelial cells in the root are still alive. So in this root, in the root sheath, they're still alive. But as they become keratinized and the hair protrudes, the hair root and the shaft, that hair dies. The basic structure is here. We have a matrix, a small number of keratinocytes. Notice the term keratin and cyte. Cyte is cell, keratin is a protein. Keratinocytes at the base of root, which actively are dividing. Root is embedded in the hair follicle. So the root of the hair is embedded in the hair follicle, which is epidermis. Extends deep into the dermis. You have this outer component which anchors the follicle, and inner component which anchors tightly to the hair root. And so basically you have these cells that are being keratinized that are slowly growing out. And as you can see, as you all know, your hair starts in the dermis usually, at the root, and it grows out. The keratinization of the cells, and it grows out into, some people longer than others, depending on where it is on your body, grows out into hair. Hey, I talked about, you saw this on the diagram, you have this inner medulla soft core, only found in the thick hair on the head, composed of soft keratin. Then you have this cortex, highly structured, organized, several layers of keratinocytes, contain hard keratin. And then you have the outermost cuticle. And you may have thought the term cuticle was only for your fingernails, but actually for your hair as well. That outermost structure, single layer of overlapping keratinocytes containing hard keratin, provides mechanical strength. All right, so notice keratin all the way through your hair. In that dermal root sheath, you have this epithelial tissue, connective tissue, which supports the follicle. You also have erector pili muscles. Remember, your hair can kind of stand up. You have these erector pili muscles, which are smooth muscles attached to the dermal root sheath on one end and the dermal papillary layer on the other. Gives you the ability to have what we call goosebumps. So there's a little bit of muscle associated with, little smooth muscle associated with hair follicles. Hair growth, generally it's 1 to 1.5 centimeters per month. It can vary. Obviously, it can vary with different parts of the body. But as the cells divide, it pushes the cells further away, kind of like very similar to skin. As they get further away from the dermis, which has the blood supply, they get filled with keratin, then they die. All right, and that's your basic structure of hair, what you need to know about hair. Your nails, very similar to hair. A hard accessory at the end of your fingers and toes, stratified squamous epithelium. Again, very similar structure to skin, but it has filled with a very hard keratin. Right, and that's what makes up your nails. You have the nail body, which is the visible portion. You also have a nail root, which is under the skin. That's where the matrix. And again, you're kind of pushing these cells out as they are actively dividing and growing, so to speak, and being pushed out. Then they are dying. This shows you the diagram of the fingernail. You don't really need to know all of this, but it's a good diagram to look at. See the nail root, the nail plate, and then the free edge of the nail. So it starts at the root, and then is growing out. The distal edge of the fold of the eponychium is the cuticle, what we call the cuticle. All right. So to know the general idea of the actively dividing cells push the neighboring cells distally. So the cells are pushed out, very similar to hair, very similar to skin. They die once keratinization is completed and have been cut off from the blood supply. Average growth of a nail is 0.5 millimeters per week. Toenails grow slower than your fingernails. And some of you who got manicures and pedicures, you know that very well. But once again, think about it. We spend a ton of money getting our hair and our nails done. But ultimately, what people are looking at when they look at hair and nails is keratinized, stratified, squamous, epithelial, which is in essence cut off from blood supply and therefore by nature and by scientific proof is dead. Nails also do not contain melanocytes. Melanocytes help give us pigmentation, but they do not contain melanocytes, so that's why they appear translucent. Primary function of your fingernails is to protect the edges of your fingers. Glands. We spoke a little bit about glands in chapter 4, but here's a little bit more information on glands. So we have sweat glands, which produce sweat, sudiferous glands, and then we have sebaceous glands, which produce an oily sebum. Both come from your epidermal cells and are located deeper in the dermis. Right? These are some pictures of your different glands. Eccrine sweat glands, apocrine sweat glands, sebaceous glands. There are actually 4 different types of sweat glands, right? They all work by exocytosis, merocrine secretion, if you remember that. Vesicles carrying the substance that is to be secreted are in the cells in the sweat gland. They come to the surface, combine with the plasma membrane on the surface, and then are released into the duct or released onto a surface. All right, so you have 4 types of sweat glands. Eccrine, sweat contains mostly water, waste products, and electrolytes. Remember, sweat is a waste product. One of the reasons why when we sweat, we tend to take a shower afterwards if we're doing a lot of sweating on a hot day or after a workout. Your sweat contains waste. That has unfortunately a smell to it. It exits through sweat pores onto the epidermal surface, onto the skin surface. These are your sweat glands. Remember, it's a merocrine secretion. So vesicles release this through the plasma membrane up the duct onto a surface. You also have apocrine, right? These are found in specific body regions. Secretions become odoriferous, have a smell. Once skin bacteria metabolize the contents. These are large glands, secrete into the hair follicle. These are influenced by your sex hormones. Apocrine sweat glands. So these are associated with the hair follicles. We also have uh, ceruminous glands, which is a modified apocrine gland. This is your earwax, right? So they submit and they secrete into the hair follicles in your ear. Um, Helps trap incoming particles into your ear. So things that may, remember, your ears are open. So things that could come into your ear can be trapped in your earwax. Therefore, so that your ears don't get infected. But the earwax is a type of sweat. The earwax comes from a type of sweat gland, an apocrine sweat gland, ceruminous, a modified apocrine sweat gland, a ceruminous gland. And you also have mammary glands. And I know some people say, well, wait a minute, a mammary gland is a sweat gland? It's considered a sweat gland, a specialized sweat gland, which produces a modified sweat. Remember, these are vesicles from the inside of the cell that are released into something or onto a surface. And so it's not saying that breast milk and sweat are the same thing. They're very different. It is a highly specialized sweat gland, but the structure is very similar to a sweat gland, but it produces milk. Sebaceous glands, on the other hand, you have different sebaceous glands branched with clusters of secretory cells surrounded by small ducts. They can be found everywhere in the body except for on your palms or on the soles of your feet. Secretion is influenced by your sex hormones. Your sebum production increases after puberty. What is sebum? Sebum is this waxy, oily mixture, mostly lipids, released by holocrine secretion. Remember, that means that the cell the substance forms in the cytosol of the cell and the whole cell ruptures. Holocrine secretion, and then the secretory cells accumulate sebum until they rupture, right? That sebum provides a hydrophobic barrier, inhibits water loss. It also helps kill bacteria. It lowers the pH of your skin and therefore can help kill bacteria. So it's another way. Notice all these different ways, but it's another way your body can protect itself. And these are your sweat and sebaceous glands. Now, lastly, 5.6, we talk about a little bit of pathology of the skin. And I'm just going to go through this briefly because most of this is not critical to our learning, but I think it's important to look at. Acne, everybody knows about acne, which is accumulation of sebum from your sebaceous back here, from your sebaceous glands, your sebum, your waxy, oily mixture of mostly lipids. Remember? So accumulation of sebum and dead cells within sebaceous glands produces this blackhead, these acne, these pimples, so to speak. Which can cause once they are inflamed, and then you pop them, and there's that little fluid that's coming out of them. That's sebum. You also have wounds. We have lacerations where the epidermis and or dermis is cut. You have burns, which can be on the epidermis, dermis, or subcutaneous, and then skin cancer obviously can affect the skin. Burns, first degree, superficial, only affecting the epidermis. So based on what level of skin it's affecting is the type of the degree of burn that it is. A second degree burn would have involved the epidermis and the dermis. The pain, blistering, scarring. I would say this is probably quite a lot more burns than you probably are aware of. And then third degree, most damaging, it involves the epidermis, the dermis, and the hypodermis. So all the way through the skin or deeper, anything past, going past past the dermis. The problem with this is, as you see here, they're not generally painful at first because you've destroyed the nerves. You've gone that deep, but you've also destroyed your immunity. So they can be very dangerous in the sense that you're now exposed to your layer of defense is down. Your main layer of defense is down if you have a third degree burn. There's also fluid loss. That's another problem with third degree burns, dehydration, because now your skin is not able to keep the fluid in your body. All right, rules of 9 is just estimating how much of a body has been affected by a burn. You can see this diagram here. If you have a burn on your chest, back, it could be 18%. Each leg is 9%. Your arms are 4.5%. Your above the shoulders, it's 4.5%. That's how they say they use these percentages to say, oh, they had 36% of their body covered in third degree burns, for instance. So if like both of your legs were burned, you would say 18% of their body was covered in third degree burns. Skin cancer is also an issue with your skin. Cancer is the most common disease in the world. It can happen just by mutating your DNA. And we cannot always predict when or where it will happen. We know some things that can cause cancer or lead to cancer, such as smoking, but it's not necessarily always the case. And so there's tons of research that has already been done and that is currently being done to figure out how do we get to cancer, to figure out how do we cure cancer, to figure out how do we prevent cancer, to figure out how do we live with cancer. All these things are being researched in many different places in this world because cancer has affected so many people. Cancer basically is unchecked cell division. So you have cells that are dividing and they form this large population of undifferentiated cells, tumors. So these cells are not doing anything that's productive to the body. They're just dividing on their own and forming this lump, so to speak. Cancerous tumors are able to metastasize, and the tumor can spread through your blood, through your lymphatic vessels, to your bone. It can cause all kinds of problems. There are 3 cancers that affect the skin, and they're linked to UV radiation exposure. So that's one cause, one carcinogen, one cause of cancer. You have basal cell carcinoma. And that arises from the keratinocytes in the stratum basal of the epidermis. So this is skin that's been exposed to UV radiation. Can have this basal cell carcinoma at the stratum basal of the epidermis. Usually they just can cut this out of you and it usually doesn't spread. You have squamous cell carcinoma. Squamous, what does that mean? Remember squamous, cuboidal, columnar, squamous, flat. Second most common skin cancer, cancer of the keratinocytes of the stratum spinosa. It's usually on the head or the neck. These tumors are more likely to metastasize, but you can still cut them out. And I've known people that have had these types of cancer, and literally they go in and remove a section of that skin. Then you have malignant melanoma. cancer of the melanocytes. And this is very dangerous. Early detection is critical. Melanocytes extend down to the dermis and the blood vessels. So if since they do extend into dermis and the blood vessels, it's easy for this type of cancer to spread. Malignant melanoma can be distinguished from other skin cancers by this ABCDE rule. It's not it's asymmetrical. It's not a nice circle. Order irregularity, the colors, the blue, black. So it just basically gives you some ideas of how we can figure out that it is malignant melanoma. And that is the end of the chapter. Hopefully you've learned something about the integumentary system.